Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Mem Aleph. We just started the third chapter and we discussed the idea of statues. And we said how statues, theoretically, Rabbi Meir says, actually, since in my neighborhood, this is the way the Gemara understood Rabbi Meir, since in my neighborhood people worship them, therefore it must be in other areas they worship them as well, which means that since we're choshesh l'mi'ut, we're worried about a minority of people, let's forbid all of them. That's the way the Gemara understood Rabbi Meir's position in the Mishnah. Then we had the rabbis who said only if they're holding, we're going to get back to this today, certain items. We'll talk about what those items are and why those items are significant and why they're indicators that this was used as an idol as opposed to just used for a pretty statue. Third opinion was from Shimon Gamliel, who said anything they hold in their hand is a problem. From then, we moved into two statements. We have Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, who said, by the way, we're only talking about statues of kings. Those are the only ones we're concerned about that might have been worshipped for used for idol worship. And Rabbi Barchana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it's when they're in the entrance to the city. Now, we understood it the way Rashi did, which is in the entrance to the city, that's when they're more likely worshipped. Tosfot actually has the opposite approach and says, there's statues in the entrance to cities actually for beautification of the city. Specifically, that's when we're going to allow it. It's when they're not in the entrance to the city that it's more of a concern that it's used as an idol. So we actually have two opposing interpretations, which I didn't mention in the previous class, but now I'm mentioning it. It's Machloket Rashi Tosfot. Now we're going to start with our daf. I'm a Rabbah. Rabbah now is going to go back to the Machloket of the Mishnah and says, Machloket b'shel kfarim, abba b'shel kachim, divrei hakol mutarim. So Rabbah says the Machloket, by the way, is only in the small villages. But in the bigger cities, everyone agrees that it's allowed. Why? Because in the bigger cities, what's the purpose of the statues? They're making them for beautification of the city. Right? In small villages, they don't put up statues to make the city look nice because it's just a little village. And there, if you see it, it must. So there, we're going to assume that's where the whole machloket is used for idol worship or not. But in the big cities, everyone agrees that it's just to beautify the city. To which the Gemara asks a question about this: says, wait a minute, oh, sorry, I didn't read it right. I started with the wrong word. In the villages, is there really someone who says that it's for beautification? In the villages, everyone would agree that there's nobody who does big statues in villages for the purposes of beautifying the village. No, and this you learned a little bit about the way their villages were made up, right, and the way it worked. That again, there's a bit of a disagreement here which one is right, but the Gemara now is going to conclude that for sure in the villages nobody thinks it's a problem, and they're going to move everything just a step over. So they're going to say, if Rabbah said, he must have said like this, and it could be couldn't understand Rabbah based on the reality of their time. But it could be in Rabbah's time, the villages did put up stuff for beautification of the city. So they changed Rabbah. We don't know who's changing this, by the way. It's the Stam de Gemara, which came later. Amar Rabbah, machloket b'shel krachim. Specifically, the debate is actually in the big cities. Aval b'shel kfarim, divrei hakol asurim. But in the villages, for sure, everybody agrees it's forbidden. In other words, now the Gemara assumes there's no way anybody thinks that they use them not for idol worship in the villages. Of course, in the villages, it was idol worship. Nobody put up big statues in the village to beautify the city. And therefore, the machloket, whether or not we view this as an idol and forbid it or permit it, because usually it's not used as an idol, and we don't have to assume it was used as an idol, that's only in the city. Because in the city, we can have this debate, but certainly not in the villages. That's the conclusion. Now we're going to go to the rabbi's opinion in the Mishnah about holding certain items. The Chachamim einam osrim, and we said, unless the statue is holding a makel, a staff, tzipor, a bird, or a kador, or a ball. So now the Gemara wants to understand what's the symbolism of these three items. Makel sherodet atzmo tachat kol haolam kulo kemakel. A makel is because the king is basically saying, that was usually a staff was used as an indicator of a leader or a king. The king is saying, everyone's under me, and I will hit them with the staff if I need to. And right, the staff is what you rule people with. Tzipor shetofes atzmo tachat kol haolam kulo ketzipor. Right? If you have a tzipor, basically, what's a tzipor? It flies in the air. It's above everybody. It sees everything, controls everything below it. So if the king is holding the statue, is holding a bird, it's an indicator of this is the king who rules over everything. Again, if you're talking about ruling over the whole world, that's already a godlike thing. If you're talking about ruling over the community, that's very local. That's not necessarily idol worship. Kadul. Shetufes tatzmo tacha kol olam kulo kikadul. Right? Again, he rules over the whole world. This is like, I assume what they mean is the world, which is a globe, round, right? Which already by that point they had that. People understood that the world was round by that point. And what they're saying is, again, he's got the world in his hands. Kind of sounds like Atlas, right? So I think there's some connection here to the Greek mythology of this idea that he's got the world in his hands. Okay? And again, that's idol worship. Tana. Now there's another braita that adds to the rabbis. Hosifu alehen saif atara v'tabat. They added 3 more things to the rabbis. So at a later time, we're going to talk about now what they think originally and why they add this later. Later time, they said also holding the following 3 things: a sword, a crown, and a ring. So saif, a sword. Why a sword? At first they thought it was just a robber holding a sword. That's like a person who wants to hold people up. By the way, a lot of this language, horeget atzmo, or do this tatzmo, is what we call sagina hor. It's the opposite. This person is actually trying to say, not kill himself, kill the whole world. Okay, the sword is a symbol. I can conquer the whole world. Atara, crown, meikara savor, right? A crown. It's not exactly a king's crown. It's a tiara kind of thing. Meikar savor, in the beginning they thought gedil kalili ba'alma. They just thought it was a decorative item. Ulevasov savor, but then they realized ke'atar alamelech. It's like a king's crown, and therefore they said this must be also idol worship. Tabat, the ring. Now they're obviously talking about a signet ring. Meikar savor ishtaima ba'alma. So why a signet ring? That is a symbol of power. Well, in the beginning they thought, and the way Rashi understands ishtaima, there's different interpretations, that they thought it was a messenger holding, usually someone else had the signet ring of the king, and that's what the statue was of, not the king himself. But then they realized that it's a symbol of somebody signing away the death of everybody in the world. Again, the power they hold over everyone, that they could theoretically, if they want, make have a seal. This sounds like the Achashverosh story, and kill everybody. So that's how we explain the rabbis' symbolism of all these items, and why the rabbis think any of these items is a symbol that this was used as a god. This statue was worshipped, and that's why it's forbidden for us to benefit from. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said anything they're holding in their hands, and because it says anything, the rabbis explain, the Braita actually explains, Tana afilu tzura afilu kesam, even a little pebble, even a little wood chip, toothpick kind of thing, doesn't matter. Any little thing, even if it's insignificant. So comes Rav Ashi with his question, and it could be they're using this as a mockery of the idols. By Rav Ashi asks, Tafas biyadot so'ah. What if he's holding feces in his hand, the statue? Okay, why you would ever have a statue doing that, I don't know if there was ever such a thing. On the other hand, we saw that they worshipped idols by defecating in front of them, so perhaps there was. Mahu. Mi amrinan kule amazilu ba'ape kitsoah. Maybe it's a symbol of everyone else is like feces in the eyes of this statue, because the statue is God and everyone else is nothing. Oda amrinan, or maybe we say, or maybe it's a disrespect for the statue. It's saying the statue holding feces is basically saying this person who we made the statue of is like feces. And then it's a huge humiliation. No one's going to worship something like that. Question ends with Teku. We don't know the answer to Rav Ashi's question. And with that, we move to the next Mishnah. Hamotzei shivrei tzlamim. If you find broken pieces of statues, so the statue itself is forbidden, but if you find broken pieces, harei elu mutarim, they're already permitted. Matzah tavnit yad or tavnit regel. But if you find a whole hand or a whole leg, harei elu or foot, harei elu asurim mipnei shekayotze bahem ne'evad. These are forbidden because there are some people who worship hands or feet of idols, so therefore it's forbidden. Now we're going to start with the Gemara, and then we're going to get back and understand different parts of this Mishnah. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, Afilu shivrei avodah kochavim. Even broken pieces of idols, not just statues, but broken pieces of idols that were worshipped by idol worshippers are also permitted. Now the Gemara says, how could you say that, Shmuel? V'ha'anantnan shivrei tzlamim. Doesn't it say broken pieces of statues, which seems to indicate broken pieces of statues are permitted in our Mishnah, but it would imply not broken pieces of idols, because broken pieces of statues, we don't even know if they were used for idol worship or not. So we're not going to be stringent about the broken pieces, but it sounds like broken pieces of Avodah Zarah, of actual idols, would be forbidden. So huadin dafilu shavrei avodah kochavim. So they say no. You could infer from the Mishnah, okay, the Mishnah just wasn't referring to it, but it means broken statues and broken idols. Now, by the way, why would broken idols be okay? And we're going to get into this sugya later, because the assumption is once it's broken, they don't want to worship it anymore, and then it loses its significance as being an item used for idol worship. So it's no longer used. When we talk about this concept of bitul, that the idol worshipper is nullified, and they say this is no longer an idol for me anymore, and once they do that, it doesn't have any status. So broken pieces of idols should be really one and the same. So now you have to understand, why did it say broken pieces of statues? What was it trying to limit? Right? This is permitted, but something else is forbidden. So what's the inference to make from here? Well, what they want to say is the reason why they talk about broken pieces of statues specifically, because they wanted to teach you the end of the Mishnah. They wanted to say, broken pieces of statues are fine, but not if they're in the shape of a whole hand or a whole foot. Right? Because people do worship those items, and therefore a whole piece, no. But broken pieces, yes. Tanan. But now we're going to have another difficulty on Shmuel. It says in the Mishnah, and specifically the line we just read, now, the Gemara is going to ask, but those are broken pieces, really. Why on earth would you say if it's a hand or a foot, it's broken? We just said broken pieces of statues are fine. Turning now to Amabet. Shmuel says it's where they're on a stand. If they're on a stand, that's different. That looks like something people have worshipped. That's not the same as a broken piece that's on the floor or something like that. Now we get into this big machloket about broken idols. We didn't really talk before about how they got broken. Now we're going to say, what if it just broke on its own? Now, if an idol worshiper takes an idol and breaks it, obviously they're saying, I don't want to use this as an idol anymore, and then it doesn't have status as an idol. And that means we can benefit from it. But, Itmar, we have a machloket. What about Avodah kochavim shenishtabra me'eleha? What if the idol fell on the ground and broke, shattered into pieces? Now what? Is it canceled, or is it not automatically canceled from being an idol? So it's almost like, havdil, but we talk about things still have sanctity in them, right? How does the sanctity come off? This is like the opposite. How does the idol worship status come off and allow us to benefit from it? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asura, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Muteret. Machloket Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, and then we're going to lead into two questions. We're going to first explain their positions, why Rabbi Yochanan says it's forbidden, and why Rish Lakish permits. Then we're going to have Rabbi Yochanan raises two difficulties against Rish Lakish, and then once we resolve the second one, that resolution is going to lead us to ask the question of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, that's the bulk of our daf. And then we're going to get off on a side question from that. So Rabbi Yochanan says Asura. Why? Deha lo batla. Because it broke by itself. The idol worshippers didn't cancel it and say, or the owner of that idol didn't say, I don't want to use this as an idol. So it's still in existence, and it still has its original status. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Muteret. Mistama bitule mevatale. We assume they must cancel it as soon as they see it broken. For what reason? For obvious reasons. Meimer Amar, the owner will say, Ihi nafsha lo atzla. This idol couldn't even save its own body. Lahu gavra matzale. What? This idol's going to help me? The idol couldn't save itself from being broken, so this idol's not going to help me, and realizes that the idol's worth nothing. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan starts questioning Rish Lakish. He's going to question from a story in Sefer Shmuel, when the Aron Kodesh was in, the Aron Abrit was in the Plishtim's territory. It was in Beit Dagon, which was an idol place where they did idol worship. And it said there, they woke up in the morning, and what do they find? Rosh Dagon ushte kapot yadav krutot. Wake up in the morning, they see the head, and the hands were cut off. And then it continues to say, El hamiftan, it's on the threshold there. Rak Dagon uchar. Okay, so Dagon was left on the threshold there, the broken statue. And then the next pasuk is Uchtiv, and it says, we're in Shmuel Aleph, chapter 5, verse 5 now. Al kain lo yidrechu kohanei Dagon v'chol ha'ba'im beit Dagon al miftan Dagon ba'Ashdod ad hayom hazeh. From that day on, the people who worship Dagon would never walk on the threshold. So what does Rabbi Yochanan say to Rish Lakish? Look, it broke by itself, right? Nobody broke it. I mean, God made this happen that it broke. And that's my proof. They still worshipped, right, the place where Dagon broke. It's like worshiping Dagon. Amar, so it didn't lose its, Avodah Zarah sanctity. Amar lo, misham raya. So Rish Lakish answers, that's not a proof. Hatam shemenichim et Dagon v'ovdim et hamiftan. You misunderstood the story. They left Dagon and said, oh, obviously Dagon is not our idol anymore. And they started worshiping the threshold on which it broke. Because it's almost like the threshold broke it, and therefore the threshold is where the power went. That's what we're going to say now. The Isar of Dagon, which is like sort of like the power of Dagon left, and Ati have Etiv le ala miftan, and it moved to the threshold. And that's why it doesn't prove anything, because actually it proves my point, which is Dagon had no sanctity anymore, and it was no longer an idol, which meant that we can now benefit from it. Again, I shouldn't really call it sanctity. It's, Avodah Zarah sanctity to them. Etive. But what really means is they canceled it. They said this is no longer an idol. Etive. Second question from our Mishnah. Hamotzei shivrei tzlamim harei elu mutarim. So what can you infer from here? Ha-shivrei avodah kochavim asurim. Now this is what we inferred before to go against Shmuel. Right? It sounds like broken pieces of idols would actually be forbidden. And again, that goes against Rish Lakish, who says they're permitted. So, Lo tema shivrei avodah kochavim asurim, ela ema, don't say broken pieces, don't infer that. Ela ema, you should say, hatzlamim atzman asurin, utstam de Rabbi Meir. The inference is, this Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir's position. That when it says the broken pieces of statues are permitted, it really means to tell you, though, what's forbidden? Not broken pieces of idols, but full, complete statues are forbidden, like Rabbi Meir, and that our Stam Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. So now they say, okay, well, if that's the case, we're now going to start questioning Rabbi Yochanan. So these were two difficulties in Rish Lakish, which we resolved. But based on that answer, we're now going to say, well, if that's the way we understand the Mishnah, that it's basically saying, according to Rabbi Meir, the broken pieces of statues are forbidden, and the statues themselves are permitted. I'm sorry, the statues themselves are forbidden. The broken pieces are permitted. Rabbi Yochanan should say like this. Midir Rabbi Meir nishma lehu l'Rabbanan. Well, from Rabbi Meir we can understand what the rabbis hold, because they're analogous, meaning Lav amar Rabbi Meir tzlamim asurim shivrei tzlamim mutarim. Right? Didn't Rabbi Meir say statues are forbidden, broken statues are permitted? Well, l'Rabbanan avodat kochavim nami hi asura. Now, the rabbis don't forbid the tzlamim, the statues, unless they have a hand, or, unless they're holding one of those items. But the rabbis say, fine, statues aren't forbidden, but what is forbidden? Idols, things that were actually worshipped for idols. So, just like Rabbi Meir forbids statues as if because they were worshipped, the rabbis forbids Avodah Zarah, things that were actually worshipped. And if we're going to compare them, well, if Avodah Zarah is like statues, Avodah Zarah to the rabbis is like statues of Rabbi Meir, or you could say it the opposite, Rabbi Meir, statues are like Avodah Zarah, and yet the broken pieces are permitted, then the rabbis who forbid Avodah Zarah should permit the broken pieces of them, though. Because there's this assumption, even though we're going to question this right in a minute from now, but if Rabbi Meir allows it forbids the whole statue but permits the broken pieces, then what's forbidden to the rabbis, which is Avodah Zarah itself, things that were actually real idols, then the broken pieces should be permitted as well. Now, this is a kind of silly assumption, and that's what they're going to say right now. Hachi hashta, why are you comparing them? Hatam, imra avdum, imra lo avdum. Even according to Rabbi Meir, it's not clear they worship the statues. He forbade them because it's possibility that they worship them. They might have worshipped, they might have not. And the intim tzalom or avdum, and even if they did worship them, imra bitlum. Well, once it's broken, we can assume, so we have a 50-50 chance. Maybe it was worship, maybe it's not. We don't know what percentage, but some sort of percentage. Maybe it was worship, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was used in an idol, maybe it wasn't. Even if it was used in an idol, though, now it's broken, maybe it was canceled. But avodah kochavim, vaday avdua. But if it was an idol, for sure they worshipped it. Mi yemar de batla, right? But who, and now maybe it was canceled, maybe it wasn't, but it already had a definitive definition as being an idol. So have a safek or vadai. We have a vadai, it was an idol. Safek, maybe they canceled it. Ve'in safek motzi midei vadai. And when you have that kind of situation, we say, we don't let a doubt remove a presumptive status that was in existence. With the statue, we weren't even sure to begin with. So we have a suffix about its status now. We had a suffix about its status to begin with. So we could say suffix, okay. But here we have suffix and vadai, and how could you have the suffix remove the vadai, the fact that we know before that it definitely was used as an idol? So now the Gemara is going to question, and we're going to only start with one question today, and we'll get to another one tomorrow. Ein safek motzi midei vadai? Wait a minute. Okay, we're going to see this even, right? It could be there's even more than one. But anyway, right now we're going to start with one. Ein safek motzi midei vadai? Wait a minute. We don't have a case where a doubtful situation can actually override a definitive status of something that's forbidden. Okay, now we're going to see how we know that this happens. Now, the commentaries say, of course, suffix can't take out from a vadai situation if it's 50-50 suffix. But we're talking here about a likely suffix. If it's likely, we're in doubt. We don't know for sure, but it's likely. Okay, for example, what would that be? So let's give an example, right? If something's in a presumptive status, right? Let's take our case. But it's likely that when they saw it broken, they decided, oh, this isn't an idol anymore. It's pretty likely. Right? They weren't really planning to worship broken pieces of an idol. So since it's a likely suffix, that should actually override a vadai. And what's our example we're going to bring? V'hatanya, it says in a braita, Chaver shemet. We have a person who kept mitzvot, and particularly Truma Namaso. We know they really were careful about that mitzvah, and then they die. And then they have a storage area full of produce. Even if they were put there on that day. Now the question is, did they take Truma Masra from them, right? They have a storehouse full of grains. Okay? We assume that they were Meiser. They took the tithes. Now, for sure they were Tevel before. Because of course they were Tevel. They were never Meiser before, right? When you cut them off from the fields, and then there was Gemar Malacha, you put you did all the winnowing, the separating the wheat from the chaff, the winnowing, then you brought them in the pile, and you flattened out the pile. That's Gemar Malacha. You were already obligated in Maser. That's what we call Teva. That's for sure forbidden. And now the question is, did the person take the tithes or not? That's a suffix. Now it's a likely suffix, but still it's a likely suffix, no different than our case. And what do we say? You're allowed to eat them. Right? So here you see a suffix is motzi midei vadai. Right? V'acha de vadai tefillah, it's for sure Teva. Suffix aslinu, maybe they Meiser them, took the tithes. Safek lo aslinu, maybe they didn't. V'ka'ate safek motzi midei vadai. And you see, the suffix comes and removes the vadai status of presumptive status of being forbidden. So they're going to have two answers. The first is to say it's actually vadai and vadai, and the second is to say it's suffix and suffix. So let's explain. Hatam vadai u vadai. De vadai aslinu. Kid Rabbi Chanina choza'ah. You can say that for sure they Meisered it. How do we know? Well, it was definitely Tevel. But it was definitely master because to Amar Rabbi Chanina choza'ah, chazaka achaver she'eno motzi davar she'eno metukam mitachat yado. We have a chazaka. Now chazaka works. It's very interesting to think about. This is assuming that a chazaka, which is presumed behavior, becomes a definite. It calls it vadai, because this is just the way people behave. People who are chaverim Meiser their stuff right away. Why? Because they're worried that somebody might eat it. No, you can't tell if something is Meiser or not. This happens in my house. We bring it in and we don't Meiser it. It ends up, I might put it in a separate place and then someone moves it and then someone's going to eat it, right? You got to take care of it right away if you really care about this. So then it's vadai and then that's okay. A vadai can be motzi from a vadai situation. V'ibait ema, and I have some words in parentheses and brackets. The brackets you put in, the parentheses you leave out. Anyway, I'm going to read it the way it appears in my Gemara. I don't know how it appears by you. Safeku. Okay, it's a suffix and suffix. It's actually not a vadai tevel. Why is it not a definitive tevel? Because efshar da'avi kid Rabbi Yoshaya. It could be the person did like what Rabbi Yoshaya recommended people to do. In order to avoid having to take too many tithes, he suggested to people, ta'amal, ma'arim adam al tfuato. You can kind of do this trick with your grains. Umachnisa bimot shela. Don't do the the separating the wheat from the chaff and the winnowing. Bring it in while the grains are still covered with the chaff. Kadesh, and then that's not Gamar Malacha. When you bring it into your house, but in an early stage, before you've done Gamar Malacha and completed the action of having the grains, then you're actually not obligated to Maser. Now, why can you do this? Because Kadesh Bem To Ochelet, okay, Bem To Ochelet. If you bring it into your house for the animals to eat, because the animals don't eat it separated, so you can actually bring it in before Gamar Malacha and not be obligated. Uptuam and Maser, and then it's exempt from Maser. And then if you change your mind, decide to eat it, it's okay. You already exempted yourself from the tithes. So it could be it's not even, it's a suffix whether it's even tevel or not. It could have been something that's not even obligated in tevel. Vein suffix, mosimi de vadai, and then, period. And then, that's it. And then that's why we're going to have maybe the person masered it, but maybe it wasn't even tevel and they didn't even need to maser it. Okay, that's the end of our daf. Really, there's one more line, but that's really the question that we're going to continue with, which is Ein Safek Motzimi De Vadai. Now we're going to Ein Safek Motzimi De Vadai. We're going to go to another question again. Really? Okay. We resolved the first one with this source. Now we're going to bring another source that seems to indicate also you can't have a Safek take out from a Vadai situation. So we'll get to that tomorrow. What we did today is we started with the machloket about the statues. We said that Rabbah limits the machloket first to. We thought to the villages, then he said, no, we must limit it to the cities. In the villages, for sure, it was used for idol worship. Then we went to the explanation of the rabbis and Rav Shimon Gamliel, why they think holding certain items or holding any item, right? Any item, we really just define what is any item. And the special items, we had to explain what was unique about them, and we added another 3 cases. In a later time period, in the Tannaitic time period, they added 3 more cases. Then we get to the broken statues, and what does that say? What about broken idols? So Shmuel basically said that even broken idols are permitted. We had some difficulties from the Mishnah, but resolved them. And then we went to this machlokah of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about if the idols break on their own. Okay, what happens then? Do we assume that they were canceled by the Gentiles or by the idol worshippers or not? And that was a debate, and then we had 2 difficulties on Rish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan questions, and then after the second answer of Rish Lakish, we threw the question back on Rabbi Yochanan and then resolved it. But then we had this side question about, wait a minute, how is Safek Motzimi De Vadai? Don't we have a precedent where we say you actually this assumed Ein Safek Motzimi De Vadai? Now we say maybe Safek is Motzimi De Vadai, but we explained the case either as Safek or Vadai and Vadai, and that wasn't a difficulty, but we're going to have more difficulties going forward. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.